How new inmates are tested in San Antonio, USA. In the United States, inside one of the deadliest jail systems ever documented in this prison documentary, death does not always arrive the way you expect it. It does not always come from a courtroom. It does not always come from a sentence. Sometimes, it comes from a test. A test no one warns you about. A test with no written rules, no appeal process, and no second attempt. Bexar County Jail, San Antonio, Texas. 3 violent incidents in less than 12 months. A man beaten so severely his family had to make the decision no family should ever make. A woman who never made it out of the cell she shared with a stranger. And a murder-for-hire plot, coordinated, calculated, and executed. Entirely from behind bars. Every single one of those tragedies started the same way. A new inmate walked through a door, and the testing began. Here is what the official reports will never tell you. There are 2 completely different systems operating inside Bexar County Jail at the exact same time. One is run by the government, with clipboards, medical forms, and classification interviews. The other is run by something far older, far darker, and far more organized than anything the system was designed to handle. Both will test you. Both will judge you. And failing either one can cost you your life. By the end of this documentary, you will understand exactly how both systems work, why they exist, and what they reveal about survival, power, and the true meaning of justice in America. Stay with us, because this story begins the exact second those doors close behind you.
If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.
To understand what happens inside Bexar County Jail, you first have to understand something about the human mind that psychologists have studied for decades, and something that every single person on this planet has experienced in one form or another. The moment you enter a completely new environment, your brain does one thing before anything else. It scans for danger. Not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically, in less than a single second. Your eyes move without you telling them to. Your body tenses without you making a decision. Your breathing changes without you even noticing. You are looking for the rules. You are looking for who is in charge. You are looking for where the threat is going to come from. Scientists call this a survival response. In Bexar County Jail, they call it your first test. San Antonio is the 7th largest city in the United States of America. It is a city of deep culture, layered history, and strong community roots going back hundreds of years. It is home to the famous River Walk, to the Alamo, to some of the most vibrant neighborhoods in all of Texas. But beneath the surface of that beautiful city, beneath the tourist photographs and the warm evening lights, there is another world entirely. A world that operates according to a completely different set of laws. A world where the rules are never written down, where the consequences are immediate, and where the very first hours of your arrival will determine everything that comes after. That world is Bexar County Jail, and today we are going inside it. Bexar County Jail is not a prison. That distinction matters more than most people realize. A prison is where you go after a judge has sentenced you. A jail is where you go before any of that happens. This means that inside Bexar County Jail, at any given moment, you will find people who have been convicted of serious crimes sitting alongside people who have not been convicted of anything at all. People who are waiting for a trial. People who could not afford bail. People who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet, regardless of guilt or innocence, regardless of the crime they are accused of or the life they lived before they arrived, every single one of those people will face the exact same testing process the moment they walk through that door. The system does not care about your innocence. The system only cares about who you are, what you represent, and whether you can survive what comes next. In October of 2023, Bexar County made a significant change to how it handles new arrivals. The county shifted its mental health and medical assessments over to University Health, one of the most respected healthcare systems in South Texas. This was not a small administrative decision. This was an acknowledgement that the first hours inside a jail are among the most psychologically dangerous hours a human being can experience. University Health now operates what is known as the Justice Intake and Assessment Annex, which operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It never stops. Because the flow of new arrivals never stops. When a new inmate enters the Justice Intake and Assessment Annex, the very first thing that happens is a medical and psychological screening. Trained health professionals assess every new arrival for what they call withdrawal risk. This means they are checking to see if the person is physically dependent on alcohol or opioids, because withdrawal from those substances without medical treatment can be fatal. People have died in jails across America simply because nobody checked. Simply because nobody asked the right questions in the first few hours. The fact that Bexar County now has University Health conducting these screenings is a step forward. But a step forward does not mean the problem is solved. It means the problem has been acknowledged. And acknowledgement is only the beginning. Alongside the withdrawal screening, every new inmate is assessed for suicide risk. This assessment is conducted through a standardized interview, a series of carefully designed questions developed by mental health professionals to identify people who may be in immediate danger of harming themselves. And the numbers behind this process are staggering. Studies conducted across American jails have consistently shown that the first 24 to 72 hours of incarceration represent the highest risk window for suicide and self-harm. The shock of confinement, the sudden loss of freedom, the separation from family, the crushing uncertainty about the future, all of these forces converge at once. And for someone who was already struggling before they arrived, that convergence can be catastrophic. But mental health and withdrawal screenings are only one layer of the official testing process. Once a new inmate clears the medical phase, they enter what is known as the classification interview. And this is where things become significantly more complex. The classification interview is conducted by Bexar County Sheriff's Office officers who have been specifically trained in one of the most difficult psychological skills in law enforcement, reading a person who has every reason in the world to lie to you. The classification interview has one primary goal. It needs to determine where to house this person. And that decision, which might sound simple on the surface, is actually one of the most consequential decisions the jail system makes. Put the wrong two people in the same pot, and the results can be catastrophic. The evidence for that statement is not theoretical. On February 28, 2026, a female inmate at Bexar County Jail died from injuries she sustained during a brutal assault by her cellmate. That was not a random act of violence that could not have been anticipated. That was a classification failure. That was the system making a wrong decision about who could safely share a 6 by 9 foot cell with another human being. And it cost someone their life. During the classification interview, officers ask every new inmate directly about gang affiliations. And here is where the psychology of the process becomes truly fascinating, because every experienced classification officer in that facility knows something important. People lie. People with deep gang ties will look a trained law enforcement officer directly in the eyes and deny everything with complete calm and practiced ease. Because they have done it before. Because their survival on the street depended on being able to do exactly that. So the officers do not rely only on what a person says. They look at what a person's body is carrying. This brings us to what classification officers inside Bexar County Jail refer to simply as the tattoo check. Even if an inmate denies any gang ties during the interview, officers are trained to identify what they call intel through a person's tattoos. This is not a casual glance. This is a systematic, trained, methodical reading of a person's body as a document. Specific symbols associated with the Texas Mexican Mafia, known in street culture as La Im, are documented and studied. Symbols associated with Tango Blast and its San Antonio chapter, known as the Orejones, are catalogued. A specific tattoo in a specific location on a specific part of the body can tell a trained officer more about a person's history, their loyalties, and their threat level than an hour-long interview. The body does not lie the way the mouth does. San Antonio holds a unique and deeply significant position in the geography of gang power in Texas. It is not simply a city where gang activity exists, the way gang activity exists in dozens of American cities. San Antonio is something more specific and more dangerous than that. San Antonio is considered the home base of the Texas Mexican Mafia. It is the city where the organization's roots run deepest. It is the city where its influence over both street life and jail life is most concentrated and most organized. Understanding this fact is essential to understanding everything that happens inside Bexar County Jail, because the Texas Mexican Mafia does not stop operating the moment its members are arrested. If anything, the jail becomes an extension of its power structure. Alongside the Texas Mexican Mafia, there is a second major force that classification officers must account for. The Orejones, the San Antonio chapter of Tango Blast, represent a fundamentally different kind of gang challenge for the jail system. Where the Texas Mexican Mafia operates through a rigid, hierarchical structure with clear chains of command and identifiable leadership, Tango Blast operates what experts describe as a horizontal structure. There is no single leader to identify and isolate. There is no clear pyramid of authority that you can disrupt by removing one person. The organization functions more like a network than a hierarchy, which makes it extraordinarily difficult for officers to track, predict, or neutralize. New inmates with ties to the Orejones are particularly challenging to classify because the markers of membership are deliberately less visible, less formal, and less consistent than those of more traditional gang structures. Once the tattoo check is complete and the gang affiliation assessment has been made, the classification process moves to what officers call the keep-away screening. This is the process of identifying whether a new inmate has enemies already inside the facility, or whether the nature of their alleged crime makes them an automatic target in the general population. Crimes against children, for example, carry an almost universal social stigma inside jails and prisons across the United States. An inmate arriving with charges related to harming a child faces immediate, serious, and potentially lethal danger in the general population. The keep-away screening is designed to identify those individuals and route them away from the general population into what is called administrative separation, a form of protective housing that keeps them physically isolated from the people who would harm them. And this is the moment where the official system and the unofficial system begin to intersect in ways that make the keep-away screening both critical and deeply imperfect. Because the official system can only work with the information it has. It can only protect someone from danger it knows about. But inside the pods of Bexar County Jail, information moves faster, travels farther, and arrives more accurately than anything the official system can track. By 2025 and 2026, inmates inside Bexar County Jail had access to smuggled cell phones. And those phones changed the testing process in ways that the system is still struggling to respond to. Here is how the new reality works. While a new inmate is still going through the official intake process, still sitting in the classification interview, still being assessed by health professionals, other inmates already inside the facility are conducting their own parallel investigation. Using smuggled cell phones, they are searching the new arrival's name on social media. They are checking local news websites. They are looking for viral videos, court records, anything that can tell them who this person really is before the person ever sets foot in the pod. If a new inmate was filmed cooperating with police on a video that circulated on social media, that information is known inside the pod before the intake process is even finished. The walls of the jail have become permeable in ways that nobody fully anticipated when smuggled phones became a widespread reality inside detention facilities. But even before the digital dimension entered this story, the unofficial testing process had its own ancient and deeply established logic. And to understand that logic, you have to understand one of the most fundamental truths of confined human environments. When the official system fails to provide safety, human beings build their own safety systems. When the official hierarchy is absent or inadequate, human beings create their own hierarchy. This is not unique to jails. It has happened in prisoner of war camps, in refugee situations, in any environment where people are confined together without adequate structure and resources. The human need for order is so powerful that people will create order even when, especially when, the official system cannot provide it. Inside Bexar County Jail, that unofficial order is enforced through a system of tests that every new inmate must navigate. And the first and most important of those unofficial tests is known simply as the paperwork test. When a new inmate enters a pod, the housing unit where inmates live together in a shared common space, they will very quickly be approached by established inmates, often acting on behalf of the pod shot caller, which is the term for the person who holds authority within that particular housing unit. And what those established inmates will ask for is simple. They will ask to see the new arrival's discovery documents, which are the official legal papers that detail the charges against the person. In the language of the jail, this is called showing your paperwork. The logic behind the paperwork test is straightforward but psychologically revealing. Established inmates want to verify two things. First, they want to confirm that the new arrival is not an informant, someone who has cooperated with law enforcement against other people. In the culture of the jail, this is the most serious mark against a person's character. An informant, known in the slang of the facility as a snitch, represents an existential threat to everyone around them. If a new arrival has a history of cooperating with law enforcement, everyone in that pod is potentially at risk. The paperwork test is the community's way of protecting itself. Second, the paperwork test screens for sex offenders, particularly people charged with crimes against children. In the social hierarchy of incarceration, these offenses carry the lowest possible status, and the paperwork test is the mechanism by which that social judgment is enforced. The consequences of failing the paperwork test are immediate and severe. If a new inmate refuses to show their paperwork, that refusal is itself treated as evidence of guilt. The logic is that an innocent person, someone with clean charges, has no reason to hide their documents. A refusal triggers what is called a crash, which is a physical confrontation initiated by the pod's established members. Alternatively, if a new inmate shows their paperwork and the documents reveal charges that the pod considers unacceptable, the result is the same. The new inmate is given a choice: fight and accept the consequences, or roll up, which means requesting protective custody from the guards. Rolling up carries its own social cost. It marks a person as someone who cannot survive in the general population, a label that will follow them through the entire system and make every subsequent housing assignment more complicated and more dangerous. For younger inmates, particularly those without established gang affiliations, there is a second test that runs parallel to the paperwork test. It is called the heart test. And it is precisely what the name suggests. A veteran inmate, someone who has been in the system long enough to understand exactly how it works, will approach the new arrival and take something from them. It might be a food tray. It might be a personal item like a mat or commissary goods that the person brought in. The act itself is not really about the item. The item is almost irrelevant. The act is a provocation designed to measure one specific quality in the new arrival: their willingness to defend themselves. If the new inmate does not respond to the provocation, if they accept the loss without pushing back, the message is received clearly by everyone watching. And everyone in the pod is watching, even those who appear to be looking away. The new inmate has been labeled. In the language of the facility, they are weak. And that label, once applied, triggers a cascade of further exploitation. A person labeled weak inside a jail pod may be forced into what is described as service, cleaning cells for others, surrendering portions of their commissary on a regular basis, acting as a courier for smuggled items. They become, in the brutal economics of the pod, a resource to be used by those with more power. The heart test is not about cruelty for its own sake, though the cruelty is real and the psychological damage is profound. It is about the establishment of a hierarchy that the official system has failed to provide. And then there is the gang vetting process. For any new inmate who arrives in a pod that is controlled or heavily influenced by either the Texas Mexican Mafia or the Orejones, the question of gang affiliation becomes a test of its own. Recruiters, established members tasked with identifying potential new members, will approach the new arrival and ask a deceptively simple question. Where are you from? In the context of San Antonio jail culture, this question is not asking about geography. It is asking about loyalty. It is asking about which neighborhood, which crew, which set of relationships defines who you are and where your obligations lie. The answer to that question, and the way it is delivered, tells experienced gang members almost everything they need to know. But the gang vetting process does not stop at a conversation. Because San Antonio is a city where everyone knows someone who knows someone, the verification process extends outside the walls of the facility almost immediately. Using kites, which are small, tightly folded notes smuggled between pods or out of the facility entirely, or using smuggled cell phones to make outside calls, gang members will verify a new inmate's claimed background against what people on the outside actually know. If a new inmate claims to be from a particular neighborhood but cannot name the right people, the right streets, or the right events, that inconsistency is flagged. And the consequence of that flagging is what the subculture calls a minute, a timed physical beating designed not to permanently injure but to test whether the person has the resilience and the psychological endurance that gang membership requires. Now step back for a moment and consider what we have just described. Consider the full weight of what a new inmate faces in the first 72 hours inside Bexar County Jail. They have been medically screened. They have been psychologically assessed. They have been interviewed about their affiliations and had their body read like a document. They have been assigned to a housing unit based on a classification process that, as we have seen, is imperfect and sometimes fatally wrong. And then, the moment they enter that housing unit, a completely separate and entirely unofficial system begins running its own parallel process. A paperwork test. A heart test. A gang vetting process. All of it running simultaneously. All of it carrying consequences that range from social humiliation to serious physical harm. And all of this is happening in a facility that, as of 2025 and 2026, is operating with a shortage of more than 200 deputies. 200. That is not a minor staffing gap. That is a structural crisis. In units that are supposed to operate under direct supervision, meaning an officer is physically present in the pod at all times, that supervision is simply not happening consistently. Officers are stretched across more units than they can effectively monitor. The pods are being left unpatrolled for stretches of time that are long enough for the unofficial system to operate almost without interruption. The guards know it. The inmates know it. And the people running the unofficial system have built their entire operation around that knowledge. The staffing shortage is not an accident and it is not a mystery. Bexar County, like hundreds of counties across the United States, has struggled for years to recruit and retain correctional officers. The work is dangerous, psychologically demanding, and historically underpaid relative to the risks involved. Officers who work inside facilities like Bexar County Jail absorb a level of daily stress that most people in the outside world never encounter. They navigate the same unofficial power structures that new inmates are tested by, except they navigate them as authority figures in a system where their authority is perpetually contested, undermined, and worked around. The turnover rate for correctional officers is staggering nationwide. And every time an experienced officer leaves and is replaced by someone new, a piece of institutional knowledge walks out the door with them. This is the fracture that this act is named for. It is not a single break. It is not one moment where everything went wrong. The fracture is the gap between what the system is supposed to do and what the system actually does. It is the space between the official clipboard and the unofficial paperwork demand. It is the distance between the classification interview and the heart test. It is the void left by 200 missing deputies in a facility that cannot function safely without them. The fracture is structural. It is systemic. And it has been widening for years. In June of 2025, inside one of the pods of Bexar County Jail, an inmate named Robert Parker was beaten so severely by another inmate named Tommy Lucero that weeks later, his family was faced with the decision to remove him from life support. The Texas Rangers, the elite investigative division of Texas law enforcement, opened a homicide investigation. According to reports from inside the facility, the assault was connected to the paperwork vetting process, inmates checking each other's charges and acting on what they found. This was not gang warfare in the traditional sense. This was the unofficial justice system of the pod functioning exactly as it was designed to function, with fatal results. 2 months before that, in a female housing unit, the classification system failed to identify that 2 incompatible inmates were being placed in a cell together. And on February 28, 2026, one of those women died from the injuries she sustained. These are not statistics. These are human beings. These are people with names, with families, with lives that existed before those walls closed around them. And their stories are the clearest possible evidence of what the fracture costs when it is left unaddressed. So here is the question that this act leaves you with. And it is a question that does not have an easy answer, because if it did, it would already have been answered by now. When a system is so overwhelmed, so understaffed, and so structurally compromised that an entirely parallel justice system can operate inside it almost without interruption, who is actually responsible for what that parallel system does? Is it the inmates who built it? Is it the deputies who cannot be everywhere at once? Is it the county officials who have not solved the staffing crisis? Is it the policymakers who have underfunded correctional systems for decades? Or is it something deeper than all of that, something in the way our society thinks about the people it decides to lock away? Think about that question. Because in the next act, we are going to go deeper. We are going to go inside the machine itself. And what you find there will challenge everything you think you know about justice, about safety, and about what it means to be tested. Every system in the world has 2 versions of itself. There is the version that exists on paper, the version written into law, designed by committees, approved by officials, and presented to the public as the way things work. And then there is the version that actually exists in practice, the version shaped by human behavior, resource limitations, fear, power, and the relentless pressure of survival. Inside Bexar County Jail, both versions of the system operate simultaneously, every single hour of every single day. And to truly understand what happens to a new inmate inside that facility, you have to understand both versions with equal seriousness. Because dismissing either one will leave you with only half the truth. Let us start with the official system, because without understanding what it is designed to do, you cannot fully understand where and why it falls short. The Bexar County Sheriff's Office is the agency responsible for operating the jail. The sheriff at the time of the incidents we are examining was Javier Salazar, a law enforcement official who had been vocal and public about the challenges facing his facility. The jail is not a small operation. It is one of the largest detention facilities in Texas, processing thousands of individuals every single year. The scale of that operation alone creates complexity that most people on the outside never consider. Every person who enters that facility represents a unique combination of medical needs, psychological vulnerabilities, criminal history, gang affiliations, and personal circumstances. And the system must process, assess, classify, and house every single one of those individuals as efficiently as possible while simultaneously managing the safety of the people already inside. The Justice Intake and Assessment Annex is the official system's front line. It is the mechanism through which the government attempts to bring order to what would otherwise be chaos. And when it functions as designed, it represents a genuine and serious effort to treat incoming inmates as human beings with medical and psychological needs rather than simply as bodies to be processed and stored. The partnership with University Health that began in October of 2023 was a meaningful step toward that goal. Medical professionals rather than corrections officers conducting health screenings means that withdrawal assessments and suicide risk evaluations are being performed by people with clinical training rather than institutional habit. That distinction matters enormously when you are talking about the difference between catching a life-threatening condition and missing it entirely. But here is the reality that sits just beneath the surface of that progress. The Justice Intake and Assessment Annex can only address the dangers it is designed to see. It can screen for withdrawal. It can assess for suicide risk. It can conduct classification interviews and check for gang markings and build a housing assignment based on the best available information. What it cannot do is see inside the pods with perfect clarity. What it cannot do is guarantee that the classification decision it makes today will remain the right decision tomorrow, as the dynamics inside a housing unit shift and evolve in ways that no intake form can predict. The official system is, by its nature, a snapshot. And the jail is a living, breathing, constantly changing environment. The classification process, as we established in Act 1, involves a structured interview about gang affiliations, a physical assessment of tattoos as intelligence markers, and a keep-away screening designed to root vulnerable individuals away from the general population. What we need to examine more closely in this act is what happens after that classification decision is made. Because the classification decision does not end the danger. In many cases, it simply determines the specific nature of the danger a person will face. When an inmate is placed into a pod, they enter a world that the official system monitors but does not control. This is the essential truth of how American jails operate, and it is a truth that runs far deeper than any single facility's policies or any individual sheriff's leadership. The pod is a semi-autonomous social environment. Officers can observe it, respond to incidents within it, and impose consequences for violations of official rules. But the social dynamics that govern daily life inside a pod, The hierarchies, the obligations, the economies, the tests, those are governed by the unofficial system. And in San Antonio, that unofficial system is shaped more powerfully by the Texas Mexican Mafia and the Orejones than by anything written in the Bexar County Sheriff's Office policy manual. Understanding how the Texas Mexican Mafia operates inside a facility like Bexar County Jail requires setting aside the popular image of gang activity as chaotic and impulsive. The Texas Mexican Mafia is neither chaotic nor impulsive. It is a structured organization with a clear chain of command, established protocols, and a long institutional memory that stretches back decades. Its members have passed through the jail and prison system repeatedly, and that repeated passage has given the organization a depth of knowledge about how the official system operates that is genuinely formidable. They know the staffing patterns. They know which pods have more supervision and which have less. They know how classification decisions are made and what information the official system uses to make them. And they use that knowledge to position themselves and their interests with a sophistication that consistently outpaces the official system's ability to respond. The economy of the pod is one of the clearest expressions of that organizational sophistication. Inside pods controlled or heavily influenced by the Texas Mexican Mafia, a system known as the tax operates with remarkable consistency. New inmates and established inmates alike are expected to contribute what is called the dime, 10% of whatever commissary goods they receive, to the gang leadership operating within the pod. Commissary is the jail's internal purchasing system, the mechanism through which inmates can buy food, hygiene products, and other approved items using money deposited into their accounts by family members or earned through work programs. For many inmates, commissary is not a luxury. It is a supplement to inadequate institutional meals. It is a source of basic comfort in an environment designed to provide none. And yet a portion of it flows upward, every single cycle, to the people who hold power in the pod. This tax system is not enforced through constant visible violence. It does not need to be. The enforcement mechanism is the established understanding of what happens to people who refuse to pay. Everyone in the pod knows that understanding. It was communicated through the testing process that every new inmate went through upon arrival. The paperwork test, the heart test, the gang vetting process, all of those tests were not just assessments of individual character. They were the mechanism through which the social contract of the pod was communicated and enforced. By the time an inmate has been in the pod for 48 hours, they understand the rules. And understanding the rules means understanding the consequences of breaking them. The February 2026 murder for hire case is the most dramatic and the most illuminating example of how far the unofficial system's reach actually extends. When Sheriff Salazar stood before the cameras and announced the arrest of 5 individuals connected to the plot, the details that emerged painted a picture of an operation that was, by any objective measure, sophisticated. The plot involved inmates inside the facility identifying specific targets on the outside, witnesses and rivals, and coordinating with individuals who were about to be released to carry out physical attacks on those targets after their release. The communication infrastructure for this coordination involved intercepted kites, smuggled written notes, and monitored phone calls. The intelligence officers who uncovered the plot were doing exactly what they were trained to do. But the fact that the plot existed at all, and that it reached the level of operational sophistication that it did, tells you something profound about the nature of the unofficial system's capabilities. The charges the suspects faced were engaging in organized criminal activity and retaliation. Those charges are significant not just because of their legal weight but because of what they reveal about the mindset driving the operation. Retaliation is the organizing psychological principle of the unofficial system inside Bexar County Jail. The testing process that new inmates go through is, at its core, a system for identifying threats and establishing consequences. The murder for hire plot was that same logic extended beyond the walls of the facility to the outside world. The unofficial system does not recognize the boundary of the jail walls as a limit on its authority. It recognizes only the boundaries of its own power and reach. And its reach, as the February 2026 case demonstrated, extends further than most people on the outside would ever imagine. The fentanyl dimension of life inside the pods adds another layer of complexity to the unofficial system's operation. By 2025 and 2026, fentanyl had become such a pervasive and deadly presence inside American detention facilities that it had begun to generate a counter-response from within the unofficial system itself. In some pods inside Bexar County Jail, the shot callers, the individuals who hold authority within the pod's unofficial hierarchy, had adopted a strictly anti-fentanyl stance. Not out of moral objection to drug use, but out of pure practical self-interest. When an inmate overdoses on fentanyl inside a pod, the official system's response is immediate and total. The pod goes into lockdown. Movement stops. Commissary access stops. Phone privileges stop. Every mechanism of daily life that makes incarceration bearable is suspended. And the shot callers, whose authority depends on their ability to maintain a functioning pod economy and social environment, cannot afford that disruption. This creates a deeply strange dynamic. In some pods, the unofficial authority structure is actually enforcing a version of drug prohibition, not because the shot callers oppose drugs categorically, but because a specific drug has become too destabilizing to tolerate. New inmates suspected of carrying fentanyl into the pod, what the culture calls plugging, which refers to the method of concealing drugs on or inside the body during transport, may face a forced search conducted by other inmates rather than by officers. The unofficial system is, in this narrow instance, performing a function that theoretically belongs to the official system. The boundary between the two systems is not a clean line. It is a constantly shifting negotiation between two parallel structures that need each other more than either would ever publicly acknowledge. The staffing crisis at Bexar County Jail is the thread that connects every dimension of this story. With more than 200 deputy positions unfilled as of 2025 and 2026, the facility is operating in a state of chronic structural stress. Direct supervision units, pods designed to be monitored by an officer physically present inside the space rather than observing from outside, are not receiving consistent direct supervision because there are not enough bodies to provide it. This is not a secret. The inmates know it. The shot callers know it. The official acknowledgement of the staffing shortage is a matter of public record. And the unofficial system has adapted to that reality with the same organizational intelligence it brings to everything else. The gaps in supervision are not random. Experienced inmates know when staffing levels are lowest. They know which shifts are most thinly covered. They know which areas of the facility receive the least consistent officer attention. This knowledge is part of the institutional memory of the pod, passed from long-term inmates to newer arrivals as part of the informal orientation that the official system does not provide. The tests that new inmates face, the paperwork demand, the heart test, the gang vetting, do not happen randomly. They happen in the spaces and at the times when the official system's eyes are elsewhere. The unofficial system schedules itself around the official system's weaknesses. This is the part of the story that the official reports and the press conferences cannot fully capture. Because what we are describing is not simply a problem of bad actors inside a jail. What we are describing is an emergent system, a complex, adaptive, self-organizing structure that has evolved over decades in direct response to the conditions created by the official system's limitations. Remove the staffing shortage and the unofficial system loses some of its operational freedom. Improve the classification process and fewer people end up in dangerous housing situations. Increase the resources available to mental health screening and catch more people in crisis before they become a danger to themselves or others. Each of these changes would matter. Each of them would save lives. But none of them individually, and perhaps not even all of them together, would eliminate the unofficial system. Because the unofficial system is not a product of any single policy failure. It is a product of the fundamental human response to confinement, scarcity, and the absence of adequate official protection. The June 2025 assault that left Robert Parker on life support and triggered a Texas Rangers investigation was not an anomaly. It was an expression of the system working exactly as the unofficial system is designed to work. The paperwork vetting process identified something in Robert Parker's charges that the pod's unofficial authority structure considered unacceptable. The consequence was applied with the full force that the unofficial system brings to its judgments. Tommy Lucero, the inmate charged in connection with the assault, was himself a product of the same system, shaped by the same tests, the same hierarchy, the same logic of consequences. Understanding that does not excuse what happened. Nothing excuses what happened to Robert Parker. But understanding it is the only path toward the kinds of changes that could prevent it from happening again. The February 28, 2026 death of a female inmate at the hands of her cellmate speaks to a different but equally devastating dimension of the system's failures. Two people were placed in a 6 by 9 foot cell together. The classification process failed to identify that their coexistence would be lethal. Whether that failure was a result of inadequate information, inadequate staffing to conduct a thorough assessment, or an inadequate classification framework that could not anticipate the specific combination of factors that made that particular pairing dangerous, the outcome was the same. A woman is dead. A family is destroyed. And the official system must now account for why its processes, which exist specifically to prevent exactly this kind of outcome, did not prevent it. The Mexican Mafia versus Tango Laredo case that reached sentencing in the federal courts in July of 2025 provides perhaps the starkest possible illustration of the affiliation test in its most extreme form. According to the details that emerged during the federal proceedings in the Southern District of Texas, new inmates in the affected facility were systematically lined up against a wall and asked directly about their gang affiliations. Those who gave the wrong answer, meaning those whose affiliations placed them on the wrong side of the power dynamic inside that particular facility at that particular moment, faced an immediate and coordinated physical response. The lights were cut. The assault was systematic. This was not spontaneous violence. This was the affiliation test operating at its most organized and its most brutal, and it was happening not in some distant or isolated location but in the same regional detention ecosystem that includes Bexar County Jail. So here is the question that Act 2 leaves us with, and it is a question that every person watching this documentary should sit with seriously. We have now seen both systems, the official and the unofficial, in significant detail. We have seen what each system is designed to do, how each system actually functions, and where each system fails the people it is supposed to protect or control. And knowing all of that, here's what we need to ask. Is the unofficial system inside Bexar County Jail a product of the people who built it? Or is it a product of the environment that the official system created and then failed to adequately manage? Because if it is the former, the solution is about individual accountability. But if it is the latter, the solution requires something far more difficult and far more expensive than arresting 5 people for a murder-for-hire plot or charging a cellmate with homicide. It requires a fundamental reimagining of what American detention is supposed to accomplish and what resources it actually needs to accomplish it. What do you think? Do you believe the unofficial system inside facilities like Bexar County Jail exists because of who the people inside are, or because of the conditions the official system created? Leave your answer in the comments below, because that question sits at the very heart of everything this documentary is about. We are not done yet, because we have talked about the systems. We have talked about the tests. We have talked about the incidents and the investigations and the press conferences. But we have not yet talked about what all of this does to a human being long after the tests are over. That is where we are going next. There is a word that criminologists, psychologists, and legal scholars use when they talk about what happens to a person after incarceration. The word is reentry. It sounds clean and straightforward. It sounds like a door opening. Like a person stepping back into the world they left and finding it more or less the way they remembered it. But the truth of reentry, the psychological, emotional, and social reality of what it means to come out the other side of a place like Bexar County Jail, is nothing like a door opening. It is more like learning to walk again after an injury that nobody on the outside can see. The body is present. The person is standing in front of you. But something fundamental has changed in the architecture of who they are. And that change does not announce itself. It does not come with a diagnosis or a visible wound. It comes quietly, in the middle of the night, in the way a person flinches at a sound, or cannot sit with their back to a door, or cannot trust a stranger's kindness without spending hours trying to figure out what the kindness is really about. This act is about that invisible wound. It is about the scar that the testing process leaves on every person it touches. Not just the inmates who fail the tests. Not just the ones who are assaulted or exploited or forced into protective custody. But every person who walks through those doors and survives the first 72 hours and learns the rules and adapts and endures. Because adaptation to a system as psychologically extreme as the one inside Bexar County Jail does not leave a person unchanged. It cannot. The human brain is not designed to experience that level of threat, that level of sustained vigilance, and that level of social complexity without being fundamentally reorganized by the experience. Psychologists who study the effects of incarceration have a name for the cluster of symptoms that many people develop during and after time in facilities like Bexar County Jail. They call it institutional trauma. And it is important to understand that institutional trauma is not the same as the trauma that brought a person to the jail in the first place. A person might arrive at Bexar County Jail already carrying significant trauma from their life before incarceration, from poverty, from violence, from addiction, from family breakdown, from any number of the conditions that research consistently links to contact with the criminal justice system. That pre-existing trauma is real and it matters. But institutional trauma is a separate layer added on top of whatever came before. It is the damage done specifically by the experience of being confined, tested, and forced to navigate both the official and unofficial systems of a facility like Bexar County Jail. The symptoms of institutional trauma are specific and well documented. Hypervigilance is the first and most persistent. A person who has spent weeks, months, or years inside a facility where the testing never truly stops develops a nervous system that is permanently tuned to a state of high alert. The brain learns, through repeated experience, that relaxing your attention even briefly can have serious consequences. That lesson does not unlearn itself the moment the person walks out of the facility. It travels with them. It sits in the body long after the body is no longer in danger. A person who developed hypervigilance inside Bexar County Jail will carry it to the grocery store, to the job interview, to the family dinner table, to the bedroom at 2 in the morning when the rest of the world is quiet and there is no logical reason to feel afraid. The nervous system does not respond to logic. It responds to experience. And the experience of the jail has taught it that safety is always temporary and danger is always close. The second major symptom of institutional trauma is what psychologists call flattened affect. This is the gradual suppression of emotional expression that happens when a person learns, over time, that showing emotion in a confined and dangerous environment is a liability. Inside a pod at Bexar County Jail, showing fear makes you a target. Showing grief draws attention you cannot afford. Showing joy or excitement disrupts the social equilibrium in ways that can trigger exactly the kind of testing you have been trying to avoid. And so people learn to present a flat, neutral, unreadable exterior. They learn to perform emotional absence. And like hypervigilance, that performance becomes habit. It becomes default. And the person who walks out of the jail with a flat affect is not being cold or unfeeling with the people who love them. They are using the only emotional language the system taught them. The problem is that emotional language is incomprehensible and deeply hurtful to the people on the outside who are trying to reconnect with someone they care about. Consider for a moment the family members of the people inside Bexar County Jail. The mothers, the fathers, the partners, the children. These are people who have committed no crime and face no official test. But they are being tested nonetheless, by a system that reaches through the walls of the facility and reshapes the person they love into someone they must learn to recognize all over again. Research on the families of incarcerated individuals consistently identifies what scholars call secondary prisonization, the process by which the psychological adaptations developed inside the facility are transferred, through behavior and relationship dynamics, to the people on the outside. The child who grows up visiting a parent in jail and watching that parent operate with hypervigilance and flattened affect learns those responses as normal. The partner who navigates years of stress, financial hardship, and emotional disconnection develops their own trauma responses that may persist long after reunification. The scar of the testing process is not contained within the walls of Bexar County Jail. It radiates outward through families and communities in ways that the official system never tracks and rarely acknowledges. Robert Parker's family knows this. After the June 2025 assault that left him on life support, the people who loved Robert Parker were forced to make one of the most devastating decisions that any family can face. The man they were being asked to make decisions about was not a stranger. He was a father, a son, a person with a history and a future that was now being foreclosed upon by the violence of the unofficial testing system inside a facility that was supposed to keep him safe. The Texas Rangers were investigating. The official system was responding. But the official response, however serious and however thorough, could not undo what had been done. It could not return Robert Parker to the people who needed him. And the trauma of that loss, the specific, particular trauma of losing someone to institutional violence rather than to illness or accident, carries its own distinct psychological weight that grief counselors and trauma specialists describe as uniquely complicated to process. The female inmate who died on February 28, 2026 leaves behind a similar wake of grief and unanswered questions. What happened in that cell in the hours and minutes before the fatal assault? What were the psychological states of both women involved? What pressures, what histories, what combination of institutional trauma and personal crisis converged in that 6x9 foot space to produce that outcome? The official investigation will attempt to answer some of those questions. The charges filed will create a legal narrative. But the deeper psychological story, the story of what the classification failure meant for two specific human beings placed together in a space so small that neither could escape the other, that story will likely never be fully told in any courtroom or any official report. The correctional officers who work inside Bexar County Jail carry their own version of the scar. This is a dimension of the story that receives almost no public attention, because the public narrative about jail violence tends to cast officers as either heroes or villains depending on the specific incident being discussed. The reality is far more complex and far more human than either of those narratives allows. Correctional officers in a facility like Bexar County Jail witness violence, manage crisis, and operate under sustained psychological pressure that is genuinely comparable to what combat veterans describe. They develop their own hypervigilance. They take their own versions of institutional trauma home to their families at the end of every shift. They are asked to maintain professional composure and official authority in an environment where the unofficial system is constantly testing their authority just as it tests every new inmate. And they do all of this while being aware that there are more than 200 of their colleagues missing, that the team they are part of is critically understaffed, and that on any given shift, they may be the only official authority standing between order and crisis in a pod that the unofficial system controls. The psychological research on correctional officer burnout is extensive and deeply concerning. Rates of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and substance abuse among correctional officers are significantly elevated compared to the general population. Suicide rates among correctional officers in the United States are higher than the rates for the inmates they supervise. The people we task with managing some of the most psychologically extreme environments in our society are themselves being damaged by the experience in ways that the system does not adequately recognize, support, or treat. When a deputy at Bexar County Jail leaves the facility after a shift during which they discovered the aftermath of the June 2025 assault, or during which they had to respond to the February 2026 cellmate death, they take that experience with them. It joins the accumulation of everything else they have witnessed inside those walls. And that accumulation, over years of service, produces a psychological burden that no paycheck and no policy manual adequately addresses. The question of what incarceration is supposed to accomplish is one that American society has been debating, without resolution, for generations. There are broadly two frameworks for thinking about it. The first framework emphasizes punishment and containment, the idea that removing someone from society and placing them in a controlled environment serves the legitimate social purposes of deterrence and public safety. The second framework emphasizes rehabilitation, the idea that the goal of incarceration should be to address the underlying conditions that led to criminal behavior and to return a person to society in a condition where they are less likely to reoffend. The technical term for reoffending is recidivism. Think of it like this: if you fix a broken chair poorly, it will break again. Recidivism is the broken chair breaking again because the repair was not adequate the first time. The question is whether incarceration, as practiced inside facilities like Bexar County Jail, represents an adequate repair or simply a temporary pause before the next break. The data on recidivism in the United States is not encouraging regardless of which framework you use to evaluate it. Studies consistently show that a significant percentage of people released from American jails and prisons return to custody within 3 years. And the research on what predicts reoffending points consistently toward factors that the incarceration experience itself tends to worsen rather than improve. Social disconnection, economic instability, untreated mental health conditions, trauma, both pre-existing and institutional, the absence of stable housing and employment upon release. Every one of those risk factors is present in the experience of a person who has been through the testing process at Bexar County Jail and emerged on the other side carrying the psychological weight of what they witnessed, endured, or participated in. Here is a specific and concrete example of how the scar travels beyond the individual. A young person enters Bexar County Jail for the first time on a relatively minor charge. They have no gang affiliation. They have no criminal history. They are terrified. They go through the official intake process and are assigned to a general population pod. Within the first 48 hours, they face the paperwork test, the heart test, and a version of the gang vetting process. To survive, they make adaptations. They learn the rules. They align themselves with the people who can offer them a degree of protection. They learn to read threat signals in a split second. They suppress their emotional responses. They develop the hypervigilance that the environment demands. And then, weeks or months later, they are released. They walk out of Bexar County Jail carrying the street education of the pod, the psychological adaptations of institutional trauma, and possibly new connections to the very gang structures that the official classification system was trying to keep them away from. The system that was supposed to contain and correct has, in some measurable cases, accelerated exactly the trajectory it was designed to interrupt. This is not an argument that the people responsible for running Bexar County Jail are negligent or indifferent. Sheriff Salazar's public responses to the February 2026 murder-for-hire case, to the Robert Parker assault, and to the Cellmate homicide all reflect genuine engagement with the seriousness of the problems inside the facility. The partnership with University Health for mental health and medical screening reflects a genuine commitment to addressing at least one dimension of the testing process with clinical seriousness. The intelligence operation that intercepted the kites and the phone calls and uncovered the murder-for-hire plot before it could be carried out reflects a sophisticated and serious approach to the unofficial system's most dangerous expressions. These are not the actions of a system that does not care. These are the actions of a system that cares and is nevertheless overwhelmed by the scale and complexity of what it is being asked to manage with inadequate resources. The deeper argument being made in this act, and in this documentary as a whole, is that the scar left by the testing process inside Bexar County Jail is not simply the product of individual bad actors or isolated policy failures. It is the product of a structural mismatch between what the system is asked to do and what the system is given to do it with. The 200 deputy vacancies are not a detail. They are the physical expression of a political and budgetary decision about how much the system is worth investing in. The unofficial hierarchy that fills the vacuum left by inadequate official supervision is not a spontaneous eruption of human evil. It is an entirely predictable human response to a predictable institutional failure. And the scar, the hypervigilance, the flattened effect, the secondary prisonization of families, the burnout of officers, the recidivism that returns people to the system again and again, all of it is the price being paid for that mismatch. There is one more dimension of the scar that this act must address before it closes. And it is perhaps the most uncomfortable one. The scar is not only carried by the people who were inside Bexar County Jail. It is carried by San Antonio itself. A city is not just its landmarks and its economy and its culture. A city is the sum of all of the lives being lived within its boundaries, including the lives being lived inside its detention facilities. Every family in San Antonio that has a member in Bexar County Jail is a family whose daily life is shaped by that fact. Every neighborhood that feeds a disproportionate number of people into the jail system is a neighborhood whose social fabric is being strained by the repeated removal and return of its members. The testing process inside Bexar County Jail does not happen in isolation from the city outside its walls. It is connected to San Antonio through the people who enter the facility, through the families who visit and wait and grieve, through the officers who live in the community they serve, and through the crimes that are both the cause and sometimes the consequence of what happens inside those walls. The murder-for-hire plot of February 2026 made this connection viscerally clear. The plot was aimed at specific people living specific lives in specific neighborhoods in and around San Antonio. The witnesses and rivals who were identified as targets were not abstract threats. They were real people going about their lives, unaware that inside a jail cell somewhere in their city, their names were being written on a kite and passed from hand to hand through the unofficial communication network of Bexar County Jail. The scar of the unofficial testing system, in its most extreme expression, reaches out and threatens to mark people who have never set foot inside the facility. People who have done nothing to attract its attention except to exist in the vicinity of its reach. So here is the question that Act 3 leaves you with. And this one is personal. When you think about the people inside Bexar County Jail, the new inmates being tested, the established inmates doing the testing, the officers trying to maintain order with an understaffed team, the families waiting on the outside, the communities absorbing the consequences, when you think about all of them as human beings shaped by systems rather than simply as characters in a crime story, what do you think we owe them? Not in a legal sense. Not in a political sense. But in a human sense. What do we owe the people that our society has decided to confine? And what does our answer to that question say about who we are as a society? Leave your answer in the comments. Because that question is going to follow us directly into the final act. And in the final act, we are not going to look away from the answer.